Doesn't look like any audio is showing up.
It goes to Twitch if you set it up to go to Twitch before.
That's how I remember it, but I don't remember which one I tried. But why isn't the audio showing up? Hold on.
You
Maybe
have
I'll
to
turn my
add
speakers
audio.
off. Okay, there it goes. I just can't. Yeah, okay. I think that's good. Did my screen? Oh no, I didn't start screen sharing. I just went full screen. This will work. Okay, cool. All right. Well, I'm streaming to somewhere, but I'm not sure whether it's Twitch or YouTube. I think this will be pretty good. I'm pretty excited about how the prep for this turned out. So I'm going to continue a little bit on that topic that I brought up of some papers that were dealing with how to get the essence of one-timedness and unclonability in different ways for cryptography. And one of the motivations I had for this was this really cool blog post I found from Matt Green that was explaining this paper that he wrote. It's called One-Time Programs from Commodity Hardware, and it's about how to make one-time programs from the little lock boxes that you have for keeping your passwords safe on a phone, the ones where you can only try your password so many times, and if you get the wrong password too many times, then it deletes it. And so the challenge is if you can make general purpose one-time programs for this. And I got pretty excited about this because I like this quote from the blog post that was, I think I want to change my thing to be whole window. Yeah, I can look at the Matt Green post. I can't remember how to have this tab up, but I wanted to show his blog post. But basically it says, I'm having a hard time finding, there we go, from his Twitter. Matt Green, if you don't know, has really great cryptography blog posts. So he seemed to really enjoy talking about this paper, and he said something later on that, okay, there's this interesting construction for one-time programs based on garbled circuits, which I know really well. I'm always really excited to teach garbled circuits, so that's going to be the first part of this. And he says, oh, this is this interesting construction. It's really familiar if you don't know that, if you do know this, and maybe that's kind of esoteric knowledge. So this is a hurdle for many people to understand this otherwise, underappreciated paper. But we'll get all the way through garbled circuits because I know I can explain that super clearly, and then we'll be able to understand the essence of this construction and why it's kind of interesting. This will make more sense as I go along. So I'll start by giving the overview of one-time programs and the original problem that garbled circuit solves called two-party computation and how these relate. So both the high-level description and the actual formal security definition for two-party computation come from this notion of an ideal functionality for two-party computation. So the setting is we want to instantiate some protocol, which is modeled here as a trusted third party, but we'll instantiate it with a protocol. And there's two parties, Alice and Bob. They each can provide an input. And the function of the service or the protocols to evaluate an output that's a function over their two inputs. This is like the MPC setting just specifically for two parties. And both parties can get the output. There could be other variations where only one party gets the output or they get different versions of the output, but this is kind of going to be enough for this. And really, actually, it only can matter. It's good enough here if just Bob gets the output, because we'll see. A caveat about the garbled circuits protocol. So this is a caveat. So if you aren't accepting this caveat, then it's hard to, I think, follow the intuition of the protocol. But this is going to be a protocol for the semi-honest case only. So that's going to mean that we won't consider the problem of parties deliberately putting wrong messages into the protocol. You just want to guarantee that if they had a big log file of everything that was captured while they were running the protocol, and it were reviewed by a spy, an attacker of some kind afterwards, then that transcript would not reveal any extra information. So it's not going, the threat model does not include parties injecting wrong messages into the interactive protocol, just the observation of it. The other caveat before I get into the Garbled Circuits protocol itself is that it is going to rely on a sub-protocol, which we just have to come to later. We'll be able to get through it adequately, and actually the one-time program thing from Matt Green is totally going to be instantiating this sub-protocol with the trusted hardware that you find on phones, which is the whole point of this anyway. Normally when I just try to teach garbled circuits, I kind of get hung up here because the fun of garbled circuits is that the core protocol is extremely simple and self-contained. It doesn't require any fancy cryptography, just symmetric key encryption. So the goal should be to understand the garbled circuits protocol very thoroughly. The only thing that makes the magic not fully, appreciable is that it does rely on this sub-protocol of oblivious transfer, and then to actually show how we instantiate the oblivious transfer normally using interactive cryptography. It's still not that bad, but it's a couple of more cryptography steps than just the core garbled circuits thing. So I try to hedge by usually deferring this. We'll be able to go through it again for the sake of this, but this tool will come back later. It's like a pre-processing step, but we'll see what it's used for. But anyway, so without having to go into how this protocol works, what oblivious transfer is, the sub-protocol we'll use for the two-party computation, is it lets one party provide a couple of options, so two messages. Alice inputs two messages, M0 and M1, and it lets Bob pick one of them to learn. So Bob gets to choose a bit C. It can be 0 or 1. If he chose C as 0, then he gets M0 from Alice. If he chose 1, he gets M1 for Alice. And it's a choice. He can't ask for both. He has to get one or the other. This already exhibits a kind of one-timeness because the whole point is that Alice picks two messages and Bob gets to have one of them, but only one of them, not the other. You just ran the protocol multiple times. Bob could ask for 0 one time and 1 the next time, and then would get both. So that would be kind of pointless. So the whole point of this is to give Bob a one-time irrevocable choice to learn some information that's provided by Alice. Okay, so I guess I could pause and ask for questions about this structure, but it's really hard because I think until you see what this is going to be used for, what's involved, in using it, it's hard to appreciate why this is such a core challenge. But I'll try to get through the garbled circuits and then come back to this. So I think that's going to be all right. The basic idea of garbled circuits is that we are going to give a protocol that constructs this. So it lets both parties provide inputs. It lets them get the output of just a predefined function. We're going to represent the function as a Boolean circuit. And so in this little illustration, there's 3 inputs, 3 bits of input from Alice, 3 bits of input from Bob, and some dumb Boolean circuit that gives some function of all of those inputs. I guess I do have a caveat here that I guess is fun to mention. Maybe it is, you can follow it just because it's keeping up with the logic of this. It's really about the semi-honest security model. So in the semi-honest security model, it doesn't matter which party gets the output, because if they're supposed to send the output to the other party, they can't send the wrong output, or at least we're not considering wrong messages sent by them as something. So because both parties are supposed to get the output, without loss of generality, we can just try to have Bob get the output, and he's supposed to send it to Alice. Maybe I will pause there. Did that distinction make any sense? And if not, maybe it shakes loose questions on the setup here. No, it's just all cool so far. Okay. The high-level roadmap for this protocol is kind of all at once here, but this is just the steps, and then we'll go through each of the steps in full clarity detail. The way it works is that Alice is going to pre-process a bunch of cryptography for every gate and every wire in the Boolean circuit. That's going to be called the garbling of the circuit. That is, the garbled circuit is this thing that Alice produces in the first step. In a nutshell, but we'll have to come back to this, so start getting used to being okay with this notation. The main thing that's going on is that we're going to have a pair of random strings called the wire labels associated with each wire in the circuit. These are just random strings. They don't have any connection to each other. They're all just uniform, independent, random strings. But there's one of them for the case that the wire is 0 when you run it, and another one that's represents the value in the case that I forget which one I said first, right? One if the wire is false, and another one for if the wire is true. And in a nutshell, what's going to happen is that at any time, Bob is going to receive and try to evaluate this garbled circuit. And for each one of the wire labels, he's going to learn one of the wire labels. It's going to be the one that corresponds to the value of the wire when we're evaluating the circuit on those inputs. And Bob is not going to know which truth value correspond. Like he has one of the two wire labels, doesn't know the other one, and he won't know whether it corresponds to a logical true or a logical false until he gets to the very end, and then he's going to get it. We'll go over this again, but anyway, so I mean, Alice prepares all of these wire labels, and I haven't given any indication into what the garbled gates are made of, but it's going to be, she generates all these wire labels, generates some garbled ciphertexts for every gate, sends all of those to Bob. We have to do something to get the inputs. So for the input wire labels, there's also a pair of random wire labels that Alice chose randomly. So for each one of her input bits, she could just send the wire label corresponding to the input bit she chose to Bob. So Alice providing her inputs is pretty easy. Bob needs to get the wire label corresponding to the bit of input that he chose, which maybe you can already see is exactly what the oblivious transfer gadget accomplishes. So you just use the oblivious transfer for each of Bob's input bits, and that's how he gets the wire label for his input. Then now that Bob has all the input wire labels, all the garbled gates, he can evaluate the circuit and then gets the output. I have a comment here that Alice decodes the output, but that's not necessary. So I would edit in these. I forgot to, but would delete that. It's even simpler. All right. I did think I did actually a pretty thorough job just now of everything that I needed to say about wire labels, but I will go again. Oh, and I did see comments, so I can scroll and check those quickly. Yeah, whatever. Oh, wow, really? My Twitch stream's just canceled. That's hilarious.
I assume you age restricted it. I don't think they did, unless
Oh,
you
that
didn't.
it?
That's spicy. Yeah, it's somewhere in
I think
here.
that it was going to take forever. Well, I mean, I guess age restricted's okay, right? That's not disastrous. It's not halted, right?
It's not. No, it'll still record. It just won't promote you on like the front page categories and things like that. And people might have to sign in to watch it.
Oh no, I won't be on the front page. Yeah, that's okay.
But later you should go to your control panel and just turn it off because it takes 2 seconds.
Yeah, alrighty. Okay, so I did go over this, but I will just say it again. So the first thing Alice has to do is choose these wire labels. There's going to be a pair of wire labels for every wire in the circuit. One of them is going to represent, if it's known, it's going to, the knowledge of one or the other of the wire labels represents the value of the truth table as for that wire as Bob is evaluating it. But all of these are just random strings, all independent random, and that's it. So there's no real challenge in sampling these. These are all just random, unrelated strings. The interesting thing that's going to happen now is we'll go over what she does for each one of the gates. So the basic structure of this is going to be that each gate is going to have 4 ciphertexts. And the gates are set up so that at any time, Bob, the evaluator for this garbled circuit, is going to have one of the wire labels corresponding to the input left label and one of the 2 wire labels corresponding to the right input label. So, I mean, here the superscripts are always the ID of the label. So we've got 3 labels here, an output label, 2 input labels. So superscript 0, 1, and 2. The bottom subscripts are always going to be the truth table, like the value. So this is the wire label for the case that the input value is 0. Green is the wire label for the case that the wire logic value is 1. So at any point, the evaluator is going to have one of each of the keys, either the purple or green key for the left and the purple or green key from the right. And so the ciphertexts are going to be set up as 2 layers of encryption. First, encrypt with the left key. Well, how do I have it written here? I guess it does have an answer. First, encrypt with the right key is the inner encryption, and then encrypt with the left key, which is the outer position. And essentially, the garbled gate is a truth table of ciphertext, because there are 4 possibilities corresponding to the 4 truth table possibilities of inputs to the circuit, and then also corresponding to the 4 possibilities of which pair of keys the evaluator, Bob, is going to have. And inside each one of these ciphertexts is going to be the corresponding value for the output wire label. So either the purple for the case that the output wire label is 0, and yellow for the case that the output wire label, the output value is 1. So it's 4 ciphertexts. Obviously, only the AND case gives you the AND, the true wire label. All of the other combinations, true, false, false, true, false, false, that corresponding ciphertext will contain the false wire label. And now the last step here is shuffling these, because we're preparing these garbled gates so that Alice can send these garbled gates to Bob. So, and the whole point is that Bob is going to get 1 pair of keys, 1 from each left and right, and he's going to be able to use these keys to try decrypting all of these 4 ciphertexts. One of them is going to work. The one that works is going to spit out a useful key that he can use going forward, but he's not going to know what logic value corresponds to the pair of wire labels that he has. He has 2 wire labels, but he doesn't know whether it's 0, 0 or 0, 1 or whatever. And so he also doesn't know which entry in the truth table, logically he's successfully decrypting, but he can successfully decrypt one of them, and it does output a key, which he still doesn't know whether it's true or whether it corresponds to true or false, but he can use it going forward. So to summarize and depict all of this, Alice generates all of these wire labels just by sampling, generates these garbled circuit packages for every 4 ciphertexts for every 2 input gate. Then she sends all of those ciphertexts over to Bob. They're shuffled. She doesn't send the wire labels, keeps them private, sends all of these ciphertext packages. She sends her input wire labels. So now Alice is picking the input string 0, 1, 1. So she needs to send those wire labels to Bob so he can get started on the decryption process. So right now, Alice had this whole circuit, all the wire labels. Bob just has the ciphertext but doesn't know their values. And he has the wire label for Alice's inputs but doesn't know whether they correspond to 0 or 1 each bit. We need to get Bob his inputs, and this is where the oblivious transfer again comes in, because Alice has chosen a wire label for in case Bob's input is 0, a wire label for the case that Bob's input is 1, and Bob needs to get the corresponding 1. But without telling Alice which one he picked, and without him being able to get any information about the other one that he didn't pick. So we just do one of those oblivious transfer gadgets, 1 for each of the Bob input labels. So now, this is just kind of the fun payoff. Maybe you see where it's going. Bob has everything he needs to start decrypting each one of the gates. So he has a pair of wire labels, doesn't know their logic values for the first input gate. That lets him decrypt one of the 4 ciphertexts for that. And what he gets from successfully decrypting it is another key. So he can do this for each of the input labels. He gets a key for each layer of the circuit. He can then take these 2 intermediate keys. That's what he needs to decrypt that next 2 input gate. All right, and by just proceeding through this computation, eventually he can decrypt the final output gate, and whatever bits that output, he can just get those in plain text, because now he's allowed to learn the values of the final gate in the circuit. Now I'm going to pause here for questions, because actually that's the entirety of the protocol. It has you can see why it's this kind of satisfying feel, because you set up everything using very simple cryptography and just picking random choices, but you set everything up so that once you set up the state of the inputs where Bob has one wire label for each one of the inputs, and all of those ciphertexts, he's just ready to go. In particular, this is just a computation, right? He doesn't need to keep asking Alice for more help every step in the circuit. Just runs through, he has the keys to start with, so he can make his way through decrypting all the stuff all the way through the circuit. Princess.
So just to clarify, the oblivious transfer only comes in when Bob is basically getting the keys that correspond to his input from Alice.
Exactly right.
Okay, thank you.
I actually have, remembering that when I have done this before, I try to think of, are there applications where we could already use this fun bit and skip the oblivious transfer, and this would still be meaningful? So maybe we can consider things where Bob doesn't have to choose any inputs, but the problem is still interesting somehow. I struggle to really come up with a good one because it's a little bit too contrived. I have come up with one, but I think it's, I'm not sure it's, well, I'm not sure how plausible it is. It would be something where, well, I'm trying to see if I want to just pause or explain my first answer for this. I don't think it's too contrived and it's not what I want to focus on, but the example that I have in mind is something where I thought it would be something like satellite avoidance or something. Like, say you have a very low power, I don't know if it's going to be low power. You have a low communication channel, and you have some information that you want to be able to compute on in a very low latency way. So I tried to imagine this as a satellite that needs to make some collision avoidance decision, but it doesn't have enough onboard computing to do a whole solution itself. But also somehow it's not trusting of the control station, so or vice versa. So the control station only wants to send and I think this example is terrible and going nowhere. I can't remember whether it was always terrible or it's just I'm missing a part of how I made this work. And I'll go on unless anyone wants to think of other things where you can avoid the oblivious transfer. Maybe that's the right way to live it. The oblivious transfer really is kind of important to this. It is only used in that one place in the protocol. So, it'd be nice if you could just skip it, but it does seem inherent for any of the interesting applications. So we do use it only on that part. Yeah, that's what it's used for. Okay. Just really like going through this animation. I would say I also like implementations of this because it's really fun to write the evaluator because it's kind of pleasing. You can't get it wrong. It's kind of easy to debug. You get, some useful output at each stage. Okay. I can talk about the security property, but I'll only do this at a very high level. I guess this whole presentation is going to be very high level and intuition based, but there is a notion of security. I do think that if I just say, my Santa Claus diagram, this is already a fully formal security definition if you accept the context of just knowing what ideal functionalities and universal composability are. This is already then a complete definition of the security model because it says what Bob gets, and the implied security model is that it's zero knowledge regarding anything else. Bob gets this output and learns zero information about anything else. Obviously, the function sometimes reveals something about Alice's value, but not always. Anyway, so that is the formal security definition, but you could typically also try to work out, okay, what is it actually saying? What do you need to prove about it? And so the slightly more formal security notion, because we're just in the semi-honest case, is why there's a nuance here. The way it's described as it's still in the form of you can simulate the real world just given your view of the ideal world. What it means is that for it to have privacy to be zero knowledge in this setting, each party given just the information that they would have in the ideal functionality version of the protocol, which just means the input that they chose and whatever the output of the function is, that's their ideal view. So given the ideal view, you should be able to produce a transcript of what the real world protocol could have looked like that perfectly matches the distribution of what the real world protocol would have done. And so to set up what you have to do, you can just do this systematically. There's no creativity to it. It's just what do you see in the ideal world? Well, you see your own input that you chose and the output. What do you see in the real world protocol? Let's just say from Bob's point of view. Bob sees all the garbled tables that he gets from Alice. He sees the input wire labels that Alice gave him. He sees whatever he saw from the oblivious transfer subprotocol and the whatever the subprotocol gave him. So he sees his own input wire label for each of the input bits that he chose. And what can we say about the distribution of this transcript? Well, you can't just pick random values for all of the ciphertext because part of the distribution includes anything you can check about the distribution. So when we're trying to construct the simulator to show that Bob isn't learning any extra information about Alice's inputs, we're showing that even without knowing the value of his inputs, he can make this transcript that looks indistinguishable from the real one. So when he looks at this transcript, it can't just be random values, because if you tried the decryption with the input labels that are part of the transcript, if none of the ciphertext work, then that is not plausible that it's a transcript of the real protocol. You should be able to carry out the evaluation protocol given the input labels from this transcript, and it should sure enough decrypt one of the 4 ciphertexts for each gate, and then if he keeps going and uses that key from this transcript, it should work. So basically it should look like the whole evaluation function works, even though he chose these randomly. And roughly this just comes down, there usually aren't that many choices in writing such an answer. So it's like, well, you try sampling everything that you can. For every gate, there will be 3 things that you can't successfully decrypt. So they may as well just be random strings pretending they're ciphertext. Whatever value Alice chose is just going to be an independent random string. So you might as well just sample those. Same thing for the wire label for Bob. For the subprotocol, you typically have to, well, you would have had to prove that the subprotocol also does this. So essentially you can ask your subprotocol to give you a transcript under the same conditions that we're trying to satisfy by constructing this simulator. So this is kind of a modular call to the subprotocol. It gives you a transcript for you to use in your simulator proof. And then the last step is that everything's chosen, but all you can really do now is carry out the encryption protocol, basically filling in what is a ciphertext for the last row that you haven't just sampled with garbage, but it has to be an encryption of the wire label that you chose for the next step. And yeah, at the final gate, you're actually encrypting Bob's output. I feel like that was a decent explanation of this, but it is inherently just really in the weeds. This is a construction, but not of the protocol, it's of the simulator, so it's part of the proof. I could linger on this if someone's interested or trying to advance their cryptography sharpness. Yeah, Quintus.
Why do you say that you could just sample Alice's chosen wire input labels? Because isn't the whole idea that the gate has these inputs and they're encrypted to some of Alice's like keys, and so it's not like you could just randomly sample these because there's some connection between the inputs and the like table and the gate.
Bob, because we're here constructing the simulator, we're only going to get tested basically on, I'm saying tested, but it's hard to say this kind of precisely. You're only being tested on the values that you're choosing. So you're not trying to run the real protocol, you're just preparing this transcript, and the transcript just has to stand up to scrutiny. I do think that you have to choose these wire labels and then fill in, I mean, in the same way that you evaluated the circuit from the input labels towards the output in the real protocol, I do think that you inherently have to, in this simulator, compute them from the output back. No, I don't think that's the case. I mean, maybe I think you can do it all at once. What's missing here? I mean, so when you're preparing this simulator, you have an output, you have the input that Bob chose. What we don't know is any of the intermediate values. We don't know any of the intermediate logical values, but we're just trying to produce a bogus transcript that passes any plausible inspection. And so there has to be a ciphertext that does decrypt given the output of the previous ciphertexts. So each cipher, we've already filled garbage for 3 of 4 of the ciphertexts. We just need to make a correct encryption for the one remaining one. And whatever key we've chosen for the output label, that has to be the thing that's encrypted. And the keys it's encrypted under have to be whatever we've chosen for the wire label we know, but whose logic value we don't know.
Okay, I understand. I misunderstood the initial explanation, but it makes sense
Okay.
now. Yeah, thank you.
Cool. If this makes sense to you, that's above and beyond what I usually aim for at all. So that's cool. This is actually very far towards the experience of making a full-on cryptography proof. Anyone else want to try their understanding of the cryptography security proofs or any of the fun bits like I've gone earlier? I can go into some detail on what the oblivious transfer normally looks like. There's a protocol that I've given like a nice, well, we've kind of been in this world of UC. There's this caveat with this protocol that it originally was thought to have a UC security proof, and that proof was busted. And so this simple protocol is not a UC secure protocol. I think if we're already in this semi-honest model, I'm really not sure whether that matters anyway. Anyway, I don't think it's such an important caveat, but I'll just mention there is a caveat. It's a variant of Diffie-Hellman key exchange. So if you already know Diffie-Hellman key exchange, this is just put here as a reference. If not, then just wait till the next slide. But the Diffie-Hellman key exchange is this 3-round protocol that's pretty familiar. You get to some state where each party has a private key and a public key. They exchange their public keys, and as the result of sending these messages this right way, they have a shared secret that no one else has. They have some common thing that's sent. They've exchanged their public keys, and they all can compute this hash of they can raise this group element to their secret power, and they use the already raised to the power thing that the other party sent them, which is their public key. So this is a fairly simple and familiar protocol. The oblivious transfer protocol is way less familiar, but it really isn't that hard because it's kind of just like a 2-fork version of the Diffie-Hellman key exchange. So there's still just one private key for Alice, one private key for Bob. When they do the exchange of public keys, Bob sort of picks a different public key depending on whether he wants the 0 message or the 1 message. In particular, he either uses his real public key for 0 or his public key mixed with Alice's public key for the case of 1. And then anyway, when the last thing that Alice sends is then a pair of ciphertexts, which Bob can either decrypt one of them or the other, but he essentially can cancel out Alice's public key mixed in if that was the thing that he gave himself the option to do by pre-mixing the opposite of Alice's public key into it at the beginning. And if he didn't do that, then he can't. It comes down to this, like these 2 keys that are chosen are either Bob's. I won't go into the details of this. The point is that it's not that much harder than ordinary Diffie-Hellman. It doesn't really, you can then just do it with ordinary elliptic curve operations. So it's not a magic protocol. It doesn't require a moon math, let's say. just hash functions and elliptic curve things, so it's not too bad. What we will notice is that this is a 3-round protocol. Now we're getting to, so that was all of the background. That was garbled circuits. Now we're about to get to the fun bit of one-time programs. This is this 3-round protocol for oblivious transfer. It involves Alice interacting, because she has to send this response after seeing Bob's first message at the top. And we use this for the input provisioning phase where Bob picks an input. This is the protocol that we have to do for Bob to get the wire labels for his inputs. So we can get now to the distinction between two-party computation, which was the security definition I gave, and one-time programs. And the fun thing here is that it's not actually a different security definition. I think it's best interpreted as a different performance metric. The only difference between them is whether or not you allow this interactive online phase. So in ordinary garbled circuits, you do some setup, it doesn't matter. Alice picks input labels, sends them to Bob. You know, that's easy. And then Bob picks his inputs, and then we do the oblivious transfers. So that was another interactive protocol. So we still have to do this interaction after Bob picks his inputs, but before we get the output. In a one-time program, what we want is to remove this interaction phase. So we want to reach some state where Alice may have already chosen her inputs, but Bob still has the choice of his inputs remaining to pick. But no further interaction is going to be allowed between Bob and Alice. He needs to be loaded up with all of the state he needs. He's supposed to just be able to make up his mind, pick one of the inputs, and then just do local computation and figure out what his answer is. Okay, yeah, I did do this, right? So I explained it along the way, but if you just overlay this with garbled circuits, it's kind of close because Alice sends the garbled circuits. That was one message only. Alice sends her input. You could kind of just group that with the setup phase. That's one way only. But when Bob picks his value, now we have to do this interaction step. And so that's why garbled circuits with OT can't be a one-time program, because that extra step of interaction required is what's ruled out by this definition. We have this ideal functionality that's not so interesting. At least it's simple. I guess this makes it a good choice for actually for a tutorial on ideal functionalities anyway. In general, ideal functionalities shine and are best, you know, when used to model interactive protocols, especially with a small number of parties. They're kind of a nice fit for that. So this is a pretty clean ideal functionality, not too hard to understand. And we can see how it's a good fit for modeling this one-time program. The sender is PI. It's like Alice is PI, Bob is PJ. X is going to be Alice's input. And so we get things off with just Alice contributing her input. So her input's fixed. Bob learns by receiving a message from the ideal functionality. Bob learns that Alice's input is locked in. So this is saying that Alice kicks things off by choosing an input. This idealized service stores the input, lets Bob know that an input has been chosen, but doesn't tell what it is. That just signals to Bob that now it's Bob's turn to make a move. So Bob now gets to choose an input Y and sends it as his input to this protocol. And if there was some, you know, if he did this after receiving a create message, then there's no interaction with Alice implied, you know, here. So Alice doesn't learn whether or not he chose an input, let alone what it is. And Alice also doesn't have any opportunity to block the protocol. It's not like Alice has to then receive something and then tell the ideal functionality to proceed. Bob just immediately gets the output without any interaction. But it deletes that stored record, so he can't choose Y to a different value and then get a different evaluation of it. Okay, so I think we understand the definition of one-time programs here pretty well. We covered that. Okay, now not only are we pivoting to the point of this, which is how to do one-time programs, but now we're ready to get to the solution and what it means to do this from commodity hardware. So this is this cool paper about it. It's about how we can now instantiate that oblivious transfer with these counter lock boxes. And these counter lock boxes, I'll just show what the counter lock boxes are. You have these in your phone. This is the counter lock box is the thing that gives you password entry protection. If you guess the wrong password too many times, then it deletes the key that you were trying to store there. The interface then is basically, you can have many of these, so we'll have a session ID. For each lockbox you want to use, you get to choose a value K. Typically, it's a private key or something that, you're using a password to protect. You're using a password for which, given 100,000 guesses, you could probably guess anyone's password from a dictionary. And you're going to use that password to unlock a real proper full entropy private key, 32 bytes. So typically it's keys that we are storing. Anyway, I was going to try to use this K value, but anyway, the values are K and the password is P, and you can store one of these for each session that you want. And the idea is that to retrieve it, you say, I want to look up lockbox ID, my password's P, so give me it. And if it works, that's what's stored, then you get the key. And the fun of these is that they have that destruction feature, which is that if you guess the wrong password, for a lockbox, it destroys the lockbox if the password is wrong. So you get maybe some varying number of attempts, but in general you get one. For the sake of this, I'll just say I'm describing the case where you get one attempt. If you get it right, then you get the value. If you get it wrong, then it destroys it. We have an ideal functionality they provide to have this, but I don't think it adds any more insight here. They have an extra parameter for the number, but I'm just, for A is the number of tries you get. So I'm just treating A equals 1, and then this matches. I don't think there's any extra insight here. I think we get what the interface is. How do we use a lockbox for oblivious transfer? The key thing that's, I think, depicted in this. Okay, I said there's no insight here. There is a key insight here, which is that this is a two-party version of the lockbox because there's still a sender and a receiver. And that's not obvious when you just think of using this on your phone. This has been to me a big issue as I'm trying to relate this to remote attestation and SGX stuff I'm more familiar with. And I think the best way of understanding what's depicted is that Alice sets up these lockboxes on a phone and then sends that phone physically to Bob. And so this is about how Bob can access these lockboxes. He has some guesses where he can try to guess the password for each lockbox, but if he guesses wrong, it gets destroyed. I don't even think that I'm not sure whether it matters whether Bob knows that he's talking to a real lockbox or a fake lockbox. Anyway, the goal is at least to prevent Bob from learning too much. So, well, yeah, I don't know how that goes. I guess that's interesting. I think that they talk about a few other deployment scenarios where instead of a phone with the lockbox thing on them, cloud services provide cloud lockboxes, and then maybe this is just a matter of Alice sets up a lockbox and then gives Bob a login to be able to access the lockbox interface. Still has to guess passwords to use it, but has a name to refer to it by. And I suspect that it's possible to use remote attestation for lockboxes. But I haven't investigated or wrapped my mind around exactly how that works with the lockboxes that I know of. It'd be cool if you could just do this with remote attestation for a phone or whatnot. Actually, regarding SGX, I will go back to now this slide that I skipped over. One of the reasons why I'm so interested in this is because we already have one-time programs in SGX. We make use of this all the time, but what we don't have are non-volatile lockboxes or one-time programs, because you can have a one-time program, but it's just in memory. We no longer have access like we used to an on-chip non-volatile monotonic counter. So you have a one-time program, but if you have a power outage, you can't turn back on and still have the one-time program. The one-time program was in volatile enclave memory only. That becomes inaccessible if you have a crash or a reboot or anything like that. So I'm interested in this because I wonder whether or not these lockboxes can be a coprocessor add-on that you can use as a kind of form of non-volatile monotonic counter. You could, to enhance the, I guess not the functionality, but the availability of existing even powerful ones. So, their motivation was for a setting, can you do this in a case where you're willing to just send these along or use a cloud, but you don't otherwise have trusted hardware? And I think if it has remote attestation, it might be usable even as an add-on. Okay, maybe this point's clear, but yeah, I want to get on with the challenge now. Okay, so I'm setting this up to see if it's a puzzle. I intend to now linger here for possibly a while to see how quickly someone can connect all of the dots here. Yeah, Quintus.
I just wanted to make sure I understand, why do you require the phone to be physically transferred from one party to another? Is there not some sense in which you can remotely set these lockboxes?
Well, from Alice's point of view, I don't know how she would know that she is setting a real lockbox. I mean, this is a question of remote attestation. If she can log into the remote device and be confident that it's a lockbox, then that works.
Okay.
But if it's just she makes a socket connection to Bob's phone, unless it provides trusted hardware and remote attestation, I'm not sure what it is she would check to know that she's sending the inputs to the lockbox or not. It could be that this also only makes sense in a Byzantine fault tolerant case, and then maybe I have switched between settings here. So my intuition about this problem comes from Byzantine behavior.
Okay, yeah, you've answered my question. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so there's protocol fun now to do. So we know we want oblivious transfer, and we have these lockboxes, but now what? We probably want to store the wire labels. Right, Bob, we're supposed to do something with these wire labels, K0 and K1. Bob needs to get one of them, but not the other. It should be whichever one he chooses, but then not the other. So obviously the lockbox is for putting things in. So I mean, you would want to put the key in the lockbox, and then Bob's supposed to get one of the passwords, but not the other. He can't just run oblivious transfer to get one of the two passwords. That's just pushing the problem in the same, doesn't reduce the problem, just leaves the same problem. You could give predictable passwords, like it's dog for 0, cat for 1, and those are two passwords, but then if they're predictable, then it seems like he'd get both of them, not just one of them. And then how's that forcing? And they're completely uncorrelated. You can't say, well, we'll just have a lockbox that, the phone provides this feature. The feature of lockboxes that phones provide don't come with OT built in. They don't have a coupled pair of lockboxes where accessing one of them kills the other. As I say it like that, I have no reason why that shouldn't be a feature. That doesn't seem like it's any harder than what the lockboxes do, but it just, they don't do that now, and for the sake of this puzzle, it's not available. Yeah, you're allowed as many lockboxes as you want, hence it's going to require a lot of lockboxes. Do you have a plan of what you'd do with multiple lockboxes?
I have some recollection from the article, but it feels kind of boring if I talk about my recollection from the article. Maybe someone else gets it.
I had to go through not only several tries of reading the article to get it, but carried several wrong understandings of how the protocol worked, and so I had to revise my understanding of it several times. So if you feel that it spoils it, then that's cool. I will. Maybe it's fun to linger here, though. I don't have any more cool content after this. We're not. Yeah. How secure are the smart boxes? For the sake of the puzzle, like the rules of the puzzle, or just in general?
In general.
Boy, that's a good question. I don't know. This was that thing of the San Bernardino Apple shooter, right? Where they got the Apple phone from a shooter, and they really wanted to get into that phone, and that was the thing that was the obstacle, is that they only had so many guesses for the password before it would actually irrevocably destroy it. So they actually really tried to get Apple to deploy an update that would somehow change the rules of that, which then they objected to doing. And we're about to go through a big court case about whether they could be compelled to use developer signing keys to push an undermining thing, which is almost exactly the thing of like upgrade resilience for MR Enclave stuff. If you have a developer key process that lets you upgrade and change the privacy policy out from under people, then that's a lot of developer ability. And Apple was mainly just objecting, saying, well, we have the capability to do that, but it would require all this custom code and deployment. So we just really don't want to be compelled to do so. And I think the story was about to become a really complicated court case, and then they just found Cellbrite or something offered to just decrypt it without any fuss. And so someone found a way around it, and I don't know what it was they found around it, whether it was actually breaking the lockbox or just the copy of the key was just stored by the app like in plain text next to the lockbox. I don't know what those are the range of the possible options, so I don't know.
I see. So it's not quite, I guess, nation state attacker resistant. It's more, I guess, resistant to, I guess, low speed offers on the whatever.
I'm not even sure you can conclude that. I would say it's unknown. Mm-hmm. Well, okay, yeah. In the case of Apple, actually, I'm not sure whether or not they revoked their own ability to be able to push such updates. I know that in that case, they did think that it was possible for them to do this, in which, therefore, yes, by definition, a nation state can compel action. I mean, legally or not, does it count? Yeah, a nation state willing to violate its constitution potentially can do that. So that should count as not quite secure, but it's not clear whether that's inherent, and I'm not even sure whether that's true of the names as well.
In the end, they didn't need to go to the constitution route, right?
But I don't know why. I don't know if it was because of the failure of the lockbox or something dumber downstream.
Oh, I see. I thought you mean like they spent a few $1 million to buy it from like, some government agency of another country.
No, nothing. It wasn't quite like that, but it was. I forget exactly how it goes. Wikipedia have more detail on it now. I went through this order. We'll post it. A third party had demonstrated a way to unlock the iPhone in question. Then they said that they did it without. So does anyone describe how this happened? I believe that there was just no information revealed about how they did this. But if we could find out, that might be really relevant and interesting to understanding the security of these. So it is a good and important question, but I would say it's just inconclusive. Oh, okay, it is still right. I wasn't sure if I remembered that right.
Maybe
oh, no, okay,
Apple
that's
actually,
the wrong information. Yeah.
Maybe Apple actually wanted to publicly declare they're opposed to revealing the information, but then in private just revealed it to avoid the hassle, but to save PR.
That's very plausible to me.
I also have a guess at the protocol, which
Okay.
yeah,
An informed guess.
Yeah, an informed guess with updated priors. So I think the idea is like, let's say you have two lockboxes, and you lock key 0 with password 0, and for all of them you only have one attempt, and then the other lockbox you lock key 1 to password 1. And then the desired protocol would be that Alice sends the lockboxes to Bob, and Bob chooses 0. or 1, and then apply 0 to
Uh-huh.
both. For one of them, nothing, or you'll get nothing back. For the other one, you'll get K0 or K1, depending on what it chose. Now the issue is if Bob obviously does this sequentially, right? And so if he's being malicious or like trying to screw the protocol, he could on the first one get it right. So apply E bit B to the lockbox storing KB, and then you'll be able to get the key out of it, the second one. But that happens with probability half, and the other half of the time it gets the wrong lockbox first, screws it up, and then can only get one key out of it. And then the idea is that you take this kind of probabilistic approach where the adversary can with probability half break the protocol, and you blow it up so that with an exponentially small probability, or I don't know, the small probability, the adversary is able to get both, or like Bob is able to get both keys out of it, and most of the time it's only one. That's kind of the intuition.
So we have many keys for 0.
Exactly.
And the final thing is like encrypted with all of them somehow, or you just need the whole one of them to get anything.
Yeah, like you can
And
just think of them as
so-
all like one-time pads, and then K00 is actually K0.
Wait, say that again?
So I'm saying one way you could split this up is, couldn't you just take like K00 is K0, and then K01 is some, what, sorry.
Yeah. I mean, I spot where you went wrong, and it's not too hard. So I mean, yeah. You don't want one of them to be literally the key, but you basically want to just one-time pad them all to each other. So you need to XOR all of them together or something, and you get the final one.
Yes.
Yeah. What you have in mind is right. So yeah, you have the real K0 somehow you can only get by having all of these because they all just XOR against each other. And they're all encrypted with a password that I think you can just use a fixed string. So just call it 0 is the password or 1 is the password. But each wrong one and then all of these are shuffled. So you don't know which one's which. You just have all of these lockboxes, and you can't be compelled to put you can't be compelled to put the same password into both of them. You can change your guess midway, but you don't have any information about which one's which until you try the password. And if you get even one guess wrong, you destroy one of the ones that you actually wanted, and you don't get the final output you wanted unless you have all of the ones of a series. And so you get an exponential boosting the more of these you do, because you have to guess 50-50 right K times in a row. There's really no, I mean, at some level you guess one and then you'd be removing information about what should be the right guess, but you can't guess one wrong. If you get even one wrong, meaning you get the wrong value from the series, you don't get the information about that at all. Yeah, so that is the full right answer. I have this then just again slightly color coded. I don't think there's anything really good at it. Yeah, it's the same thing. I did write out this padding, so it's K0 is all of these picked together, but it's so these are all independently, even n-1 of them are uniformly random, only one of them is needed to, the last one gives you the original key, and then yeah, you just shuffle all of those.
So this is different from the oblivious transfer protocol we saw earlier in that it's non-interactive, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's non-interactive in the sense that there was one round of interaction for Alice to, I mean, in a protocol, maybe there was setup phase. Who knows how many rounds it took. If it's physically sending the phone, then I'd call that one round. But then from prior to Bob's input being chosen, no further interaction happens. So yeah, it's non-interactive where it counts.
Jonathan, how does this relate to that? Is this This seems related to that Dan Bonet shared with us. Or I don't know. I don't want to derail, but it's still relevant.
Yeah, there are connections, I guess. Because like, if I recall correctly, like the paper shared by Dan is getting you oblivious transfer out of the hardware tokens. So you can probably like, pick up from there afterwards.
I don't know what we're talking about.
It's not, I don't think he's one of the authors.
Okay.
Let me just
What's it
try
called
to
though?
pull
I
it
know.
up.
So I'll share it in the side chat in a second.
My guess is that one of the key differences is generalizing this to more parties than just two parties. So this one was kept very simple and self-contained, but I believe the two-partiness of it is one of the things that's limited. It's not like a publicly verifiable PC or anything. Okay, yeah, I did get it right. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I can also say that I didn't present, I think, any of the, not sure whether I presented any answers from the paper. Most of this paper is about how to do it very efficiently. I think that this protocol may be considered extremely simple and just the starting point. Really, this protocol is then undesirable just because of how expensive this is, especially in terms of number of lockboxes. This is this many lockboxes per bit of input. So that's kind of inefficient. And it's that much, it's worse than garbled circuits than just in terms of the extra cryptography overhead, let alone the number of lockboxes overhead. So really the whole paper goes into a ton of more challenging protocol design goals where they do laconic oblivious transfer. They overlay some existing more complicated protocols with different performance trade-offs. I mean, I haven't gone through the bulk of the paper, just kind of the surface level easy bit, although I think it's still kind of satisfying and interesting and puts the logic of this one-timeness in scope. Okay, and I already made this point, but that was the last thing that I had in mind. Yeah, and this did also mention the papers by Gada on other sources of one-timeness, which include protein logic and quantum qubits are ways of getting this unclonability. I guess this is not saying that it comes from any special physical process, just from a hardware device designed from it rather than an inherently physical process. I'm not sure to what degree this is really all that meaningful when it comes to this problem, because what's not clear to me is whether, okay, this was a cute protocol that turns a simple lockbox into a more practical one-time memory, or this non-interactive oblivious transfer. But if you're just going to build some hardware that provides a functionality, if we're going to modify the hardware, it may not be interesting to constrain ourselves to this existing thing. It may not be any more difficult to design a oblivious transfer gadget than it is to design a one-time lockbox gadget. So this is fun because it's about repurposing with software existing hardware tools. If we consider the scope to include potentially new hardware products, then this may not be a meaningful path at all. So that's where my thoughts leave it.
I guess the question is like, what's the next thing you do if you do have these kind of oblivious? If you have like one time, yeah. If you have, wait, sorry. So just to clarify the position we're in, we said okay, we can do one-time programs.
But that's
Could you connect, sorry, could you connect this to Garbled Circuits actually? Sorry, so Yeah, we started off with the explanation of why oblivious transfer is useful for garbled circuits, which is like 2PC, and then we introduced the lockboxes, which implement oblivious transfer with like non-interactively.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we just go here. Here's where we would do OT. So instead, we replace it with the lockbox trick, and then let Bob pick the input after shipping the lockboxes. It's like the only unpleasant interaction showed up just because of the OT. So if we replace the OT with something that has this non-interactive after choosing the input phase, it does everything that we need.
But this is not a one-time program in the sense that if both Alice and Bob want to repeat the computation, they can.
Yes, and that was not part of the requirement. So the model certainly allows you to, it even has this notion of SID. So you're even explicitly, I would argue, even if they didn't have that, I understand these to mean, obviously you can run many sessions of the same protocol. So yeah, it doesn't, but I mean, to put it in another, except for the private inputs that each party has, there also is not any other global private sensitive information that they both got. So really it is just about what's between them that they can do.
So I was just thinking about the key encumbrance kind of use cases where you want to maybe guarantee to like sort of an arbitrary third party that a key will only be used in a certain way. And if like from that perspective, if you don't know who the participants of the protocol are, it's like hard to have one-timeness in this sense, because my understanding of this is like because we have multiple parties involved, if as long as one of them is only willing to execute it once, we have one-timeness. But as soon as you can't like involve all of the possible parties who want one-timeness, it's like a collusion risk, right?
Yeah, so I mean, this would be a new model with other parties, not just I and J, either additional input parties or at least other relying parties that may, whether they contribute input or not, have some, want some guarantee about one-timeness that applies to everyone else. It's not clear that the lockbox thing is going to work for this at all, because it seems like the lockbox has to be in one place at a time if it's this physical model of it. And we got around the need to have remote attestation by just physically sending the lockbox. So if you're already trusting a cloud provided lockbox, which they do say, they use some Amazon key things as an example of it, then maybe this collapses and it's easy given that. It's interesting. I mean, I wonder if you could turn a public lockbox like a cloud thing into. But then someone would have to do the garbled circuits. It's also like Alice only has to defend herself against Bob. Bob only has to defend herself against Alice. I don't know who would then be trusted to generate the garbled circuits. So I mean, maybe in the world where we're just using, we have remote attestation and a stateless trusted hardware, then I can immediately see how to do it. Maybe that's so powerful. I guess another direction that the story goes, and this is maybe more in the line of the specific protocols from Gada's papers that are like, even if we allow ourselves some overpowered cryptography, like the fully homomorphic encryption or indistinguishability obfuscation, especially, indistinguishability obfuscation is so powerful, it just seems like it nearly subsumes what even SGX can do, except for the lack of statelessness. Even if you have an obfuscated function in the strongest possible sense, it's still just a function. It's a piece of information. If you could choose an input one way or the other, then you can also do both. There's no statefulness to it at all. So even if you allow yourself the fanciest of impractical cryptography, you still need one of these gadgets. So it's still a non-trivial problem how to upgrade even that strong cryptography to have this, but it's also then just that cryptography is so powerful, you can generate a garbled circuit, you can generate a self-garbling circuit with indistinguishability obfuscation. So then maybe you could have these self-garbling circuits and a publicly verifiable lockbox, and maybe that turns into something nice that's like publicly verifiable one-time programs. Yeah, that could be cool. That could be a way to approach this while keeping the specific trade-offs we want in focus. It's really great. Maybe if I change my streaming settings, I can just stream directly to ePrint.
Which I didn't understand your last point relating things to IO.
Oh, I mean, you were saying like, what's the problem in generalizing this to especially publicly verifiable lockboxes for essentially the publicly verifiable one-time programs? And I guess I was saying that that problem in general is still hard. You'd have to have some source of trusted function evaluation, and at least that is known how to do with complicated cryptography. So it's still useful to separate out publicly verifiable function evaluation from publicly verifiable one-time memories or one-time programs. And you could just provide these publicly verifiable lockboxes plus this known very powerful cryptography to get the whole solution. Otherwise, I mean, if you don't use, I wonder if there's other more practical approaches that aren't kind of cheating just because they rely on multi-party computation as the trust. All right, well, I'm completely out of content. If anyone has anything else, we can keep talking.
Thanks, Andrew.
You got it.
Thanks so much, Andrew.
All right, cool. See you.